So I'm fully prepared for the comments I know that are coming, but I actually really enjoyed Anthem, and I was absolutely gutted when the future of development ceased and Anthem was no more. So what we're going to do in this video is go through the sad story of Anthem, and this is 5 years later. And Anthem is an online multiplayer looter shooter. It was developed by BioWare, published by EA, so you can probably guess already why it was cancelled. And it released worldwide for PS4, PC, and Xbox One on the 22nd of Feb 2019. So what Anthem does is it combines third-person shooting and action role-playing, and it does that in an open world that's shared with up to 3 other players. Each player takes the role of a freelancer that has a fully customizable exosuit called Javelin. And Anthem features 4 unique javelins, and you had to progress through the game to unlock them. They had unique attributes and abilities and stuff for different styles of play. You started off with the Ranger, that was like just an all-round sort of balanced javelin. Then you went to the Colossus, which was an absolute tank. It was slow, but it was big. You had a massive shield so that you could absorb attacks and you can hit enemies with it. You then had the Interceptor for the fast, agile gameplay. And then you had Storm, which was the least armoured, but you could remain airborne for the longest with Storm, and you could attack from a distance using elemental energy. And the central meeting point, the hub for the game, was Fort Tarsis. It served as a fortified settlement against the threats of the outside world, and is where the player ended up going to get new missions and to get different assignments and stuff. It was also where all of the stores and everything was, so it was just your central hub. And there was a lot of things that went wrong with Anthem. You had the Cataclysm that took ages to come into the game. People complained about the loot and the mission layout, just pretty much the gameplay in general. Everyone kicked off and said that Anthem was a really bad game. And development of Anthem started in 2012 after the release of Mass Effect 3, under the supervision of Casey Hudson. Casey was the executive producer of the original Mass Effect trilogy. Internally, the project was codenamed Dylan by BioWare in reference to Bob Dylan, in hopes that it would be a name that would be spoken about years later. However, the working title up through 2017 was called Beyond. So before Anthem, the game was actually called Beyond. And BioWare had absolutely no idea what this game was for a very long time. I remember there were talks of sitting like through the E3 presentation. It was only then the developers were like, oh shit, this is the game we're making. So yeah, BioWare had pretty much no idea. They knew they wanted an action game that players could play cooperatively, and one that moved away from their Mass Effect and Dragon Age franchises. And an early idea focused on the direction of exosuits akin to Iron Man's, so that you can survive on a planet that acted as a Bermuda Triangle that drew in all types of hazards and dangerous creatures. It was initially stated to be a mission-driven survival game rather than a looter shooter. What you would do is team up with your friends or other players, you'd go into missions, you'd fight your way to and from sites collecting resources to then upgrade your suit. And whilst all of that's going on behind the scenes, BioWare could pull various world event triggers to keep players surprised and alert to the events. The idea was that players, after completing the missions, would then be able to share their stories with others. And that was how the game was presented during the 2014 event. And the primary concern during the early stages was scaling up the concept in gameplay, art, and technical feasibility within the Frostbite engine. Because, you know, when a publisher gets something in their head, it has to go their way or it doesn't happen. And I remember the CEO of EA, Andrew Wilson, mentioning that every time he'd go and visit BioWare, things would change. Like one day he'd go, there'd be flying in the game. The next day he'd go, the flying was taken out. It was back and forth through development with the game for a very long time. And around August 2014, Hudson believed the team at BioWare was in a sufficiently good place to continue without his oversight, and he left BioWare. Some people inside the Anthem team were concerned, as Hudson's leadership on past games kept their team on point, and that was in contrast to the current development efforts on both Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect Andromeda's teams. And we all know how Mass Effect Andromeda went. And after Hudson's departure, the team started to struggle on the scaling aspects that impacted other parts of development. In early 2015, Dragon Age's writer David Geider was assigned to the team to help with the story. David drew the story back towards something more in common with Mass Effect and Dragon Age, rather than pull away from those series. The narrative shifts put further strain on the artists and level designers to match with the story's direction, And then what does David do? David goes and leaves BioWare in early 2016, and the story was brought back towards what the team had originally envisioned. So they were basically pulled out of their original vision, pulled back in, out, in. Like, it was just a massive roundabout clusterfuck, and it was a nightmare for the development team. They didn't know whether they were coming or going. And furthermore, the team continued to struggle with the Frostbite engine, as EA's management wanted all of its studios using the same technology. Frostbite was not originally designed for the purposes that the team had in mind for Anthem. BioWare had difficulty transitioning some of the systems they had built for Dragon Age and Mass Effect into Anthem, and that actually led to the team scrapping some of their gameplay concepts, like survival and crafting. Some of the BioWare team that were familiar with Frostbite were moved to support the FIFA series. I absolutely hate the FIFA series nowadays, but that happened in 2016 when it transitioned to the Frostbite engine, leaving even fewer people to help with Anthem. And it doesn't help when EA are obviously going to pull people over to FIFA and Madden just to focus on Ultimate Team because it brings in so much money. Between March 2020 and April 2021, EA made over $1.6 billion from Ultimate Team mode alone. And people are still surprised as to why every single year when they release a new, it's not even FIFA anymore, it's FC, people are surprised as to why they only ever focus on Ultimate Team and those packs that you can buy in the store. But 4 years into the development of Anthem, developers expressed concern that it was nowhere close to the final production stages, and they were facing similar issues with poor management of the project as had happened with Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect Andromeda. And that was because there were barely any concrete decisions that were being made by the lead designers. Despite trying to distance themselves from Bungie's Destiny, elements from that game, particularly related to the loot shooting aspects, started to appear into Anthem's gameplay as BioWare recognized that Bungie had greatly refined these elements. And then moving from 2016 to 2017, several events forced many of the decisions in Anthem's final design. As part of a holiday tradition in BioWare, one team provided the staff with a demo of their current project to play and test over the Christmas holidays, and 2016 was Anthem's turn. The Christmas demo had reached management by early 2017, and they expressed great concern with the state in contrast to the previous 2014 teaser, and ordered several senior members to fly to Stockholm, Sweden, to discuss how to improve the game with EA DICE, Frostbite's creators. Management then told BioWare to create a new demo in anticipation, so get off your ass, go create me a whole new demo. But they had to make a new demo in anticipation of E3, which BioWare considered would be the end of the game if the demo didn't impress management. BioWare spent 6 weeks to produce the best looking demo to show management when he was to visit the studio in 2017, prior to E3. To put their best work forward, they re-added the flying aspect that had been added and removed several times over the course of development. And it's saying here that at the time management, it wasn't Andrew Wilson that did all the flying out, so I'm mistaken on that part. It was Patrick Soderlund, or Soderlund, I'm not sure how you say the surname, but it was Patrick that was flying out, as Patrick was the management for the game at that time. And Patrick was impressed with the demo, particularly the fly-in. That demo served as the basis for the game's reveal at E3 2017, but just weeks prior to E3, EA notified BioWare that their desired name for the game Beyond would be too difficult to trademark, so BioWare chose Anthem, one of their backup names instead. Separately, Andromeda shipped, the BioWare Austin office shifted from that to help with Anthem, while EA shuttered the Montreal offices. Andromeda had several problems at launch, drawing BioWare staff to resolve the issues. The game wasn't as successful, which put more pressure on the quality of Anthem. And even after resolving Andromeda, there were tensions between the Edmonton and Austin teams, in part due to the lack of concrete decisions on gameplay elements. And then around mid-2017, several BioWare staff departed the studio, and one of the lead gameplay designers, Corey Gasper, suddenly passed away. The game was to have transitioned from pre-production to production around June 2017, but as late as August, Anthem remained behind schedule. BioWare knew they would miss the expected Q4 2018 release. EA refused to allow the game to be delayed past March 2019. So as always, publishers forcing those deadlines, like you are not to have it past this day, even if it's unfinished, we're still shipping it. And around October 2017, Hudson returned as both the project lead and the new studio head. BioWare staff that had been working on a fourth Dragon Age game were moved to Anthem, including Mark Dara as executive producer. Dara then took control, focusing the team on releasing Anthem by EA's deadline and firming decisions on elements of the game. So finally, got some concrete. And BioWare developers speaking anonymously with Kotaku stated that most of Anthem was effectively developed in the year prior to release, and that was only due to Dara's leadership and pressure from EA. But because elements of Anthem were changing quickly, factors like game balance and narrative cohesion were difficult to address before launch. This further stressed the staff at BioWare, and there were a large number of departures from the studio across 2017 and 2018. And then someone called Drew worked on the game's writing before leaving in early 2018. So pretty much everyone that worked on the game ended up leaving it at some point. And it was pretty much all due to a lack of management. BioWare got so much shit when this game launched in a bad state, and it was not their fault. It was because management never led them properly. There was people in and out, direction of the game changing, EA was pushing deadlines on them. And I mean, granted, you're a developer, it's your job, but they were supposed to have started development in 2012, stating that it took 7 years to create the game when pre-production took about 5 years. They had about 18 months or something to develop the entire game. And that's why in Anthem, there was a mission to do with some tombs or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but there was a mission that was purposely designed to have you do that mission over a longer period of time compared to others because the game was so short. They had to put in filler content that was really, really long-winded and dragged out so the players didn't feel the game was far too short. And then EA CEO Andrew Wilson spoke on the state of Anthem in June 2019 during E3, recognizing that the game had not reached the expectation that EA had. But one thing they said is that EA still remains committed to improving the game. Not that it's EA doing any of it anyway. But Andrew Wilson identified that the game generally ended up with two sets of players, those that are fans of BioWare and expecting story-heavy content, and those that are fans of action-adventure games. Wilson said that through playtesting, both sets of players were satisfied with Anthem, up through about 30 hours of content. But after that, the game had a diverging audience, with many of those BioWare fans finding the lack of story a disappointment. Andrew Wilson believed that BioWare will be able to evolve to find means to meet the expectations of both set of players and will be able to improve Anthem in the long term. In August 2019, following several months of delay, BioWare released the first timed act of Anthem's post-launch content, dubbed Cataclysms, as part of a development plan to release 3 acts over a period of weeks. However, in September 2019, BioWare announced the plans for the remaining acts had been dropped and they would instead be delivering seasonal updates in order to improve core issues with the game. October 2019 saw the introduction of the first seasonal content launch, with heavy comparisons drawn between it and the prior Cataclysm event. And in a blog update in Feb 2020, BioWare said that they would be ending seasonal updates as they look to reboot the game, requiring a substantial reinvention of the core game, a move that is comparable to Square Enix's reworking of the 2010 release of Final Fantasy XIV to the 2013 revised version. Casey Hudson said in the post that BioWare wants to reinvent the core gameplay loop with clear goals, motivating challenges, and progression with meaningful rewards, and do that all while preserving the fun of flying and fighting in a vast science fantasy setting. BioWare's Austin studio director Christian Daly stated in a blog post in May 2020 that an incubation team of about 30 were evaluating Anthem's rework. And then according to Bloomberg News, the fate of Anthem's rework was to be reviewed by EA and BioWare suits, so the highest up, and that was during the month of Feb 2021. And then BioWare announced on Feb 24th, 2021 that they were discontinuing any future work on Anthem, though they will continue to support the live servers for the immediate future, while the devs on the game would be transitioned to Mass Effect and Dragon Age titles. Bloomberg reported that the decision partially led EA and BioWare to cancel the multiplayer elements that had been planned in Dragon Age Dreadwolf, instead focusing that game as a single-player experience. So that was a long-ass development we've just been through. But it all comes down to money. Andrew Wilson wasn't happy with the lack of sales and things like that. We're going to get into the sales in a moment. But the CEO wasn't happy because CEOs always want more money. There was a lack of management. There was poor decision making. There was no decisions actually set in stone. And then there were deadlines and stuff, and the game was rushed. And that's why it did so bad in the players' eyes, because it was obviously rushed. It had to be out before March 2019. So there was a lot of stuff that BioWare developers probably wanted to work on before releasing the game, but they just didn't have enough time to do it. And yes, they had 7 years from when development started in 2012, but it was due to a lack of decisions and like management and everything like that, and constant changes of direction, that they just didn't actually have enough time to work on any of it. So it started off with BioWare teasing the game at E3 2014. Then in 2017, it was announced with a cinematic reveal trailer. Then a day later, on June the 11th, 2017, a 6-minute gameplay trailer premiered. And all of that was done through E3. And then the game ended up being pushed back in January 2018 to early 2019, and that was in part to make space on EA's release schedule for a new Battlefield title in late 2018. But obviously on top of that, we know that January 2018, I believe, is when they only just finished development on the first mission of the game. Because yeah, it pretty much took like a year to finish the rest of the game. They had one mission done within like 6 months or something like that. Then they had to just go into crunch time and they had to get the game done. And it's sad because according to Patrick, the vice president of EA, BioWare were to support the game with new content and updates, and that the launch would be the start of maybe a 10-year journey for BioWare. And we all know how that went. 2 years later, it was cancelled. They didn't even go, like, they just roughly went a fifth of the way they were supposed to. They planned for a 10-year journey, ended up with a 2-year journey. And there were demos, there was a live-action short film / trailer called Conviction that was released, and that was a little story that took place before the game. And then you had the game go into premium subscribers of EA's Origin Access subscription service and stuff, and then you had like EA Access getting a 10-hour trial and things. So when it came to the reception of Anthem, on Metacritic, it scored a 54 on the PS4, a 59 on PC, and a 65 on the Xbox One. And then in terms of the user score, over 3,700 user ratings, it scored a 4. And we've actually seen a lot of games with a lower user score and even lower critic scores. They are in development for years and years after release. So I think a big part of this was Andrew Wilson wanting to focus more on the sports microtransactions and didn't really want to take a risk in terms of putting more money into BioWare for them to work on development to release the rework for Anthem. I think it was too much money that would have taken too much time, so the investment wouldn't have been as great and there would have been waiting for the money and everything like that. And EA are obviously a big corporation. They're all about money. And when it comes to the major publications, the scores were not actually that bad. The lowest score was a 5 from US Gamer and Games Radar, and then it was reaching like 6s and 7s. Oh, and Videogamer.com gave it a 5 as well. So it wasn't as bad as like a lot of other games we see. But not only that, in 2018 at Game Critics Awards, it was nominated for 5 categories, being Best of Show, Original Game, PC Game, Action Game, Online Multiplayer, and it actually won Best PC Game and Action Game. So this game got awards. Even though it was really poorly received, it was cancelled with like the rework 2 years later and stuff, it still received awards. So when it comes to the sales, Anthem topped retail sales charts in the UK during its first week of release, although its total launch week retail sales matched half of those of BioWare's previous game Andromeda. In North America, according to NPD data tracking, Anthem represents the second highest launch month sales ever recorded for a BioWare-developed game, trailing only the March 2012 release of Mass Effect 3. Anthem was at the top of the PS4 downloaded video games via PlayStation Store by March 2019. Superdata reported that the game had earned over $100 million in digital revenue in Feb 2019, of which $3.5 million came from in-game purchases. So the game didn't actually do that bad. It made 100 mil. The thing is, I can't really find any info on how much it cost to develop the game, but I think the game did end up making a loss. However, 100 mil is not actually that bad for sales, especially because we're talking about 5 years ago. But even though it made $100 million, $3.5 million coming from in-game purchases, Anthem failed to meet EA's sales expectations, with the target set at 6 million copies to be sold by the end of March. Andrew Wilson said that Anthem did not reach the sales goal. And EA's CFO, Blake Jorgensen, admitted that more money was expected to come from the game's microtransactions as well. So in terms of microtransactions and sales, the game didn't meet the expectations. But that was also the same for Watch Dogs 2, yet Ubisoft carried on with it, and it ended up making or selling 10 million copies. I think some publishers need to start lowering their expectations of initial sales, because a lot of players, especially nowadays, have this wait-and-see approach to purchasing AAA titles, because they've been burned by so many games in the past. So some games just don't do well at launch, but they eventually pick up and do really well in the future. And Anthem did sell more than 5 million copies, so it wasn't within their expectation deadline, timeline or whatever, and it wasn't quite 6 million copies, but they did sell 5 million, so it wasn't a gigantic failure. And in June 2019, Andrew Wilson reiterated how Anthem wasn't working as planned in keeping players engaged, although he stated that BioWare would continue to support the game, and then obviously in 2021 just changed his mind because the money weren't there, and cancelled everything. So yeah, that was Anthem, the sad story of development and everything like that. But I absolutely loved this game, and if there was still an active player base, I would probably play it quite a bit now. I went through the whole story, I've done a load of the end game stuff, I did some grinding for gear and everything like that, and yes, I could see its flaws. They were very present, they were clearly visible, but I still enjoyed it for what it was. And they did eventually put out the Cataclysms and things like that, so it wasn't all that bad. I just think money is such a driving force in decisions from CEOs and stuff of big publishers, and they don't look at the bigger picture. They force their developers to rush with things and get the game out on deadlines and all that stuff, and I know there's investors and everything like that as well. But I think if they did carry on with the rework, yeah, granted it would have taken a lot of time, it would have cost a lot of money, but I saw some of the concept pictures and stuff for what they was doing within the rework, and it looked really good. So I reckon the rework could have been more successful than the base game that they initially developed and released. But obviously, thanks to Andrew Wilson, we'll never find out because it's been 3 years now since it was cancelled. And it's crazy to think how much of a failure this was in the eyes of EA, yet 5 years after release, 3 years after the development cancellation, they still have their servers active. So yeah, that was a look at the sad story of Anthem 5 years later. And as stated, I really enjoyed the game. I was gutted when the rework got cancelled, but that is just my opinion. What I want you guys to do is let me know your thoughts and stuff about Anthem, the development and everything like that in the comments. And I will see you guys in the next one. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.